Greetings to everyone. Portion for today's reading is from Exodus 10 to 12. In Exodus 10, God continues his judgment on Egypt through Moses. The eighth plague of locusts comes, covering the land and devouring everything left after the hail. Pharaoh's servants begin to plead with him, recognizing Egypt is being destroyed. Pharaoh momentarily relents, but again hardens his heart after relief. Then comes the ninth plague, darkness that can be felt, covering Egypt for 3 days. Yet Israel has light. Pharaoh again negotiates, but refuses full obedience, and Moses declares that he will not see Pharaoh again. This chapter reveals how persistent resistance against God deepens spiritual blindness. Pharaoh's heart is not just stubborn, it becomes progressively hardened. The darkness is not merely physical, it reflects the inner darkness of rejecting God. Meanwhile, God's people experience light, showing divine separation between those who trust Him and those who oppose Him. Even today, partial obedience and repeated compromise can harden the heart. When people delay responding to God, it becomes easier to resist Him later. This chapter challenges us to walk in God's light fully, without negotiation, and to respond immediately when God speaks. In Exodus 11, God announces the final and most severe plague, the death of the firstborn in Egypt. This judgment will affect every household, from Pharaoh to the lowest servant, but the Israelites will be spared. God gives favor to the Israelites in the sight of Egyptians, and they receive silver and gold. Moses declares the coming judgment boldly before Pharaoh, who still refuses to listen. This chapter highlights God's justice and his distinction between his people and the world. The coming judgment shows that sin has consequences, and God's timing is exact. It also reveals God's faithfulness. He prepares his people in advance and ensures their protection. We are reminded that God's warnings are real and not just empty threats. There is always a moment when mercy gives way to judgment. At the same time, God prepares and provides for those who belong to Him. It calls us to live with reverence, readiness, and trust in God's protection. In Exodus 12, it describes the institution of the Passover. Each Israelite's household is instructed to sacrifice a lamb without blemish, apply its blood to the doorpost, and eat the meal in readiness. That night, the Lord strikes down all the firstborn in Egypt, but passes over the homes marked by blood. Pharaoh finally releases the Israelites. The chapter concludes with instructions to observe the Passover as a lasting ordinance. The Passover is a powerful picture of redemption. The blood of the Lamb becomes the means of salvation. It points forward to the ultimate sacrifice of Christ. Deliverance is not based on merit, but on obedience and faith in God's provision. The act of remembrance shows that salvation must never be forgotten. This chapter reminds us that salvation requires a response, obedience to God's instruction. It also calls us to live in remembrance of what God has done. Just as Israel was delivered, we are called to walk in freedom, leaving behind the bondage of sin and living a life marked by God's grace. Points to ponder. Am I responding fully to God's voice, or am I delaying and negotiating like Pharaoh? Is my life marked by the remembrance of God's deliverance like the Passover? May God bless you all. Amen.